Hello and welcome to our discussion on yes, work can cause a stroke. This discussion is relevant to both individuals and organisations that employ workers or employees, and it's intended to educate you about strokes, the impact that strokes can have on a person's life, and more importantly how you and organisations can take proactive steps to defeat what is known as the silent killer. So, my name's Ollie McCann. I'm a partner at Napton Solicitors and work in the employment team, and I will be your host for this discussion. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a good friend but long-standing business associate of mine, Steve Smith, who is the CEO of Anthem Engagement and also the Northwest Employee Experience Group. He's the reason why we're having this discussion today. He unfortunately suffered a stroke in November 2021. And as a result of that, he's passionate about educating people about the impact a stroke can have and what people can do to try and avoid one. I'm also delighted to be joined by Eleanor Smith, who is Steve's daughter, but operations director at Anthem Engagement. And obviously she's been on with Steve on that journey following the stroke and can share her insights into what she has witnessed herself as a family member, but also a business colleague. And then I'm joined by Jennifer Winstanley, Head of People Projects at Napton Solicitors, who looks after employers and their employer strategies. I'm joined by Cheryl Britton. She is the co-founder and director of YOLO Wellbeing, which provides wellbeing services across Lancashire and further afield. And then finally, but not least, my colleague Vicky Cross, who is a senior associate solicitor in the Wills and Estate Planning team. Hopefully, between us, we're going to provide you with a story that is inspiring in the sense of Steve's recovery, but actually that helps you as individuals and employers to understand the importance of taking stress at work and the impact this can have on people absolutely seriously. Firstly, welcome, Steve. I'm absolutely delighted that you're here today, and you are the reason we are here gathered today talking about this really important topic. So I'd really like you to really tell us your story following your stroke in November 2021. So it's over to you, Steve. What happened?
Well, the first bit, I suffered a stroke at the Orlando airport. I was going to Disney, family holiday. Nightmare. Got to the airport, collapsed. My blood pressure maxed out the machine, and it was quite apparent that something major has happened. So at that time, I didn't know I'd had a stroke. I was 50. You don't get strokes when you're 50. I'd weakness down my right side, leg, arm, and speech, which is called aphasia. That is a nightmare for me. I like speaking. Done that.
Yeah, it definitely does.
This prevents me from doing anything.
So, Steve, what was your blood pressure when you had the stroke?
Well, it failed at 250.
Wow.
Not many people come back from that. Everybody in America said I wouldn't talk and I wouldn't walk. So, yes.
You proved them wrong.
Too right.
Well done, Steve. And what caused this blood pressure?
Mainly about stress. I worked hard, and Ellie will come back to that in a bit, but it was not looking after myself. Didn't go doctors. I was just a normal man. I'll get over it. I felt a bit stressed, and I've lots of work on, and that was really it.
Yeah. And is it right to say that the blood pressure was the principal cause of the
Yes,
stroke?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Right. Okay. And obviously, we're grateful that you've survived.
So, man,
But I'm sure it's not been an easy journey
Oh,
since then. Do you want to tell us what the journey's been like for you over the past 18 months?
yeah. Well, the work that's been by the Stroke Association and the NHS and with Cheryl is absolutely vital. So I've had speech therapy, I have had gym, and I've had physio. So lots of outside influence. So I've had lots of things to do because my mindset is strong. So I'm always wanting to do more.
Thank you, Steve. And what do you think the future holds for you? What are your plans now over the next 12 months?
Well, I think getting back to work, I'm making plans to go back now because this limitation, if you like, is not in my brain. It's still me inside. It's like an alien in your mouth. And what the future holds to me, I'm going to get over this, definitely, 100%.
Positive mental
Yes.
attitude.
But it's hard. It really is. If anybody get over this, I think it's me.
Good. And final part. You were the inspiration behind having this discussion today.
Yeah.
Why do you feel it's important to get this message out to people?
Because I've seen my friends and my colleagues, my business connections, all struggling with this. And my one hope is if one person can go to the docks, go to the doctors, and get their blood pressure checked. That's one thing off in my mind. I want them to do, look after themselves and look after your colleagues.
I think it'd be fair to say, as a business owner,
Yeah.
you tend to look after your business before you look after yourself.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And I did.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So it's about refocusing that you've got to look after yourself first before you can look after your business, I think, is
Yes.
a key message.
That's
And
it.
that means going to the doctors, regular checkups,
Yeah.
blood pressure machine, etc.
Easy.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. Welcome to Eleanor Smith. So obviously you have seen Steve's journey since it happened. I think you must have been getting off the plane with him. Right?
No,
No? Okay.
no, they left me. It's fine.
I thought it was a family holiday. Was it just for you,
No.
Steve?
Me and Karen.
Good on you. So you'll have had the devastating call at some stage that something's happened. Do you want to just tell us, sort of your story as to your involvement in what's happened and how Steve has sort of from America and being overstranded in America, being treated, being brought back to the UK, and then his rehabilitation thereafter.
Yeah, so as Steve said in his bit, he worked all the time, and we watched that most of our lives. Was especially when he had a few jobs in, Dad getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, eating his lunch at the desk, coming down, grabbing his tea, and then straight back up and working probably on some days 15, 16 hours, working weekends, because it's safe to say he loves his job. His job is not just a job for him, it's his passion and it's his hobby. So when he wasn't sat watching football, he was working. And we watched that, and it was the months leading up to his stroke where I think with being a small business owner, especially when it's a family business and it's your family's sole income, there is that fear of saying no. It's that pushing yourself to constantly meet client demands and expectations. So we tallied it up after the stroke, and we actually had 22 open projects at that time, which is more than double what we normally have in a month. As well as that, he had the NWEG awards evening, which he did have some people lined up to help him, but they had other priorities and other things that cropped up, so couldn't help. And instead of asking and reaching out for help, he just went, oh, I'll do it myself. So he was already massively overloaded. Myself, my mum, my other siblings, friends had all said to him at this point, Dad, you need to calm down, you need to breathe, you need to step away from work because you are going to do yourself an injury. He's always got ill on holidays, so Mum was already prepared with absolute bags full of tablets and things like that for when he gets this cold. But obviously he didn't even get out of the airport. So it was 1:20 in the morning, and I still remember that. I actually hung up on my mum, not thinking that it was going to be that. I just saw my mum phoning at 1:20 in the morning, I'm fast asleep, hung up. And then you get the phone call, I'm really sorry, your dad's had a stroke, the next 48 hours are critical, your dad might never come home. And that was hard, that was really, really rough. So then we've got the news, I'm in work in another job at this point, so I worked in a school at that point, where I worked 11-hour days doing breakfast and then school, then after school club every single day. So I worked 11 hours a day anyway. I was then coming home, trying to sort out all of Dad's insurance policies, any care in England for when he returned home, all the pensions, all the banks, the mortgage, everything, which, as Vicky will touch on later, was absolutely 10 times harder without having power of attorney because he's 50. Why do I need power of attorney for my dad who's 50? So that was really it. It then became apparent that I think we all thought, a couple of weeks, he'll be back home, he'll be right.
I did.
We all did. And that wasn't the case. So it then became, right, what's going to happen with the business? So I've gone, right, I'm going to have to do a few hours every evening, a few hours on the weekend. I got a family friend in who's an IT teacher to teach me how to actually do all the back end stuff, because despite working for the company for a few years before that, I'd only seen bits. I'd not seen how to actually build everything. It was just that I was the only person who knew anything about the business. So I came back. I worked it out. At that point, I was working nearly 100 hours a week because I was working between 4 and 5 hours every night after coming home from a day job, and I was working the entire weekend as well, just to try and keep things on top and keep things that there was going to be a business for you to come back to. It then did become apparent that this is not going to go away quickly. I'm going to have to take over the business. So, and Dad obviously knows this, I loved my job. I absolutely loved the job I was in. So it was a very tough decision, but family comes first. And as much as I like that job, I care about them a little bit more. Smidge. So that was my start into the business. I'm now in this business. We are a few months behind, but we are still having to take on new projects, new clients to keep that cash flow going because the family needs this. We've got some money from Dad's insurance claims, but we've got things that we've had to do in the house, like we've had to get the drive paved over because there were potholes in the driveway. We've had to get laminate flooring because he can't walk on carpet. We've had to get so many different adaptations done to the house. So pretty much most of the insurance money that he did get was blown through. Trying to make the house actually suitable for you to live in still. So yeah, that was it really. It was then looking at how am I going to run this business now, taking what I learnt from what happened to Dad and actually putting my own things into place. So
I think it's fair to say that it's not obviously the immediate impact is on Steve from his obviously health and almost like his life perspective, but actually the impact on yourself and obviously the rest of your family has just been as significant, really.
Oh, massively. Yeah, it's been completely life-changing. It is not something you expect to hear at 26 years old. You know, your dad's 5,326 miles away, because it's sad that I know that one. With your mum, you're left on your own for 3 months, trying to run businesses, trying to keep your own life going, your own priorities, trying to keep your family happy and things going there. Yeah, it were a rough few months for all of us, really.
Rough few months, been extremely tough.
Well, yes.
16 months, hasn't it, really?
Yes, very tough.
So if you obviously having been through what you've been through as a daughter, you know, sort of what message would you give to other sort of sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters when they see maybe a parent or grandparent that is working so hard?
You need to tell them, you need to have that conversation with them of, what can I take off? Is there anything that you can give to somebody else? It's making sure that, like Steve said, they are going to the hospital and going to the doctors and having regular checkups. You know, we have a blood pressure monitor as a standard in the house that we all do very much make sure that we're all using. So that all of us have a baseline knowledge of our own health now.
Yeah.
So we know when something's going wrong straight away.
I have a blood pressure machine in my top drawer.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
So I suffer from high blood pressure and cholesterol is hereditary apparently. So thank you, Ellie. Appreciate that. So Steve is really passionate about making sure that his story reaches employers, because having run a business and still running a business that works closely with employers and all being about employee engagement and employee well-being, he is determined that employers take this message back with them and start proactively looking at ways to support their employees in the workplace. Now, from a legal perspective, you know, we are all aware that employers have a legal obligation to protect the health, safety and welfare of their employees and their workers whilst at work. And this applies equally to stress as it would do in terms of, you know, working at heights, etc. It's a dual responsibility, you know, so it's not just all the onus on the employer to look after their own health and well-being. Employees also have a legal duty to look after their own health and well-being. However, the reality is that in the employment relationship, there is a balance of control that is pushed to the employer. They're the one in the sort of the master-servant relationship, so to speak. And so they are the ones that can make changes to the working environment, to the working conditions and the working requirements of the job duties in order to minimise the risk of stress. If organisations go onto Health and Safety Executive website, there is a really useful page around stress in the workplace and what employers are required to do in terms of managing stress in the workplace. But it's really important. We talk about stress as being a sort of, you know, just a mental health problem, but it's a lot more than that. Stress can cause a whole range of different medical conditions. We've heard Steve tell us his story, that he was stressed running his businesses and sort of voluntary organisations alongside sort of his family, working ridiculous hours, hardly having any time to spend and relax. His blood pressure was through the roof as a result of it, and it was his blood pressure which was the primary cause of his stroke. And there is statistics that show that blood pressure is the single most cause of a stroke. However, there are other conditions that high blood pressure and stress is going to cause problems with. So insomnia, heart disease, depression and mental health issues, gastrointestinal disease such as irritable bowel syndrome, chronic pain, and then obesity can also result as a symptom of stress, because people can turn to food or alcohol and end up drinking or eating more than they should as a sort of alleviator of stress. So the challenge is there for employers to try and find ways in the workplace to reduce stress on their staff. There's no one size fits all. That's the problem. Every employee is different. Every employee's sort of stress levels where they can cope with stress or where they might tip over will differ. Every employee's view of work will differ as well. Some people love work. We heard Steve talking about how much he loved work, but it was the fact that the work was coming in too fast for Steve to cope with, and that's about the demand and the lack of control that was being placed upon him. But other employees may not love the job as much, and therefore more demand and control on them is going to push them further into stress much more quickly and raise their blood pressure, etc. So it's no one size fits all. You just got to think about the best way to try and tackle stress in the workplace. There's a very useful stress at work indicator tool on the HSE's website, and I'd encourage every business to certainly survey their employees to find out where the risks are within their business and start thinking about how they can tackle it. But I'm no expert on HR initiatives in the workplace necessarily. I bow to the better judgment of my colleague Jenny Winstanley, who is our head of people projects here at Napthans. And I've got a few questions for Jenny to touch upon what employers can do to help their staff. So Jenny, you work with employers on their HR strategies and their wellbeing initiatives. What is your views around the need for a work-life balance?
Well, Ollie, definitely there is a need, certainly, without a doubt. And I think that's one of the things that actually has come out of the pandemic, in that in some instances, employees have been able to have more of a work-life balance, in the sense that they can work more in an agile way, whether that be their geographical location, their actual place of work, being the office or home, and their working times. However, there is still a bit of shall we say, a consensus from some employers that employees need to prove that they're actually working when they're at home, and therefore this agile working that we've adopted, employees tend to be working harder and longer just to prove that they are working, that they're just as productive, if not more productive, because it's still seen as a benefit of working from home. However, there's lots of pros and cons of having a work-life balance. And as we've seen from Eleanor and Steve, people love working sometimes, and therefore they just can't help themselves working long hours. But if we were to weigh it up, ultimately, it's not good for anyone's health at all. And that's when an organisation does need to step in and say, hold on a minute, there needs to be more of a balance. And that's when the master-servant relationship comes in. The master's in charge, the employer's in charge, and saying, stop now, it's not good for you. You are our priority, we need to look after you.
And so what do you think employers can do to reduce stress in the workplace?
Well, there are loads of things that an employer can do, certainly. And there's lots of initiatives and quick wins that a business should be doing, and many are already. But the main thing that an employer needs to have to make any of these initiatives work is have a healthy workplace culture. It starts from that. So there's no point in having free fruit in a boardroom on a Friday, or offering cycle to work schemes or discounts on shopping to encourage people to buy this fruit and whatnot from the supermarkets if ultimately the culture in your business is wrong. So having this healthy culture, this place of inclusivity, support, communication, an open forum for employees to come to their managers, talk about their workload and feel heard is the first step. From then, you've got to think about, well, culture's a massive word. It's a massive thing to change. You can't just go, let's have a great culture in your business. It doesn't work. And we're really lucky that we've got some great managers that I've come across in lots of different businesses that I've worked with that understand that all the initiatives that reduce stress can ultimately impact culture. Some of the things that can be done from the off is consulting with employees to understand what is it about their workplace that they value and they feel works, but also what is it that they feel doesn't work, down to the very, very core. And that's ultimately what Steve and Eleanor do in terms of their work, consulting with employees and understanding, because they're the people at the coalface, and then using that information to transform the culture in your business. And then, as a second initiative, influence job design and change the way that people work and what they do.
Just a question on that. Steve, you've been running employee engagement surveys for God knows
20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
And obviously the benefit for an employer is the information they receive from it.
Yeah.
Do those engagement surveys cover issues around stress at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely become more of a priority, is looking at well-being, especially after COVID and things like that. It is becoming very much one of the most asked for parts of the package. So yes, the surveys, they do show stress levels.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Jenny, you mentioned job design, just what parts of a job design can impact upon stress in the workplace?
There's 6 actually.
Okay.
I've got a list.
Very specific.
Yeah, there's 6. I've got a list. The demands of the role and on the individual itself. Control, talked about master servant, but what control an individual actually has in that job. So the levels of autonomy. And we know from research, especially in the HR world and supported by CIPD, that autonomy in a role really drives employee engagement in the workplace. Support what they have from their peers, but also their line manager and the senior figures in the business. The relationships that they have at work. You don't necessarily leave an organisation, you leave your manager, as that well-known phrase is. And therefore, if the relationships in your organisation aren't strong, then you're not going to get satisfaction, and then ultimately that might cause more stress for you. The role itself, in terms of what is it you're responsible for, your duties, your responsibilities, and what training and support have you got to undertake those. And the last big one is change. Nobody likes change. I say this all the time. No matter what you say, you don't like change. But the golden thread running through all of these 6 elements is communication. If you've got strong communication channels flowing up and down, then ultimately all of these stress factors can be reduced. And it can mean that employees can have more of a positive experience at work, and ultimately you'd hope that they would feel less stressed.
Thank you, Jenny. It's worth adding that in relation to those 6 areas of job design, the Health and Safety Executive actually do have the sort of stress survey tool built around those core areas, which can be used for free. I'm not doing any work here, Steve, but can be used for free in order to sort of understand where the pressures and pinch points are in your business. Jenny, finally, what should employees consider in terms of initiatives to try and sort of reduce stress in the workplace?
Well, there's some core fundamentals, and they just shouldn't be treated as just the minimum really that you should do. So stress at work policies, flexible working generally, the stress risk assessment in known areas, but also trying to uncover those unknown areas, and then stress surveys as well. But if we think more proactively and beyond those minimums, the health screening and the checks. Yeah. Why is it that why couldn't we offer at induction health screening packs and equipment for individuals as opposed to an umbrella or a business card or a pad? Why can't we go above and beyond to show that we're really caring about an individual's well-being? Training on alternative therapies, perhaps, if you think about Cheryl's work as well, and obviously I'm really excited to hear what you've got to talk about, Cheryl. But if we think about meditation, encouraging individuals to break down their sense of embarrassment, meditating as a group, that's seen as a bit kooky and a bit weird, but why can't we do that? Supporting staff to stop smoking. The government and the NHS ultimately push this message all the time, but we are on the coalface again with our employees, so why can't we ultimately do that? Accessing activities, exercise regimes, in lunch times, walking around the local reservoir, such as something that we do at Napthans, encouraging people to wander out for their lunch as opposed to eating at desks. I know that's something that you said. Using our annual leave for actual rest and recuperation, as we know that's what it's for. It's not just to use up our days. It's not to just work from home on annual leave days or I'll still be contactable on the phone. It's actually to switch off. Really get some downtime. So there's just a few things that I can think of there.
Yeah, I think finally there's one sort of intermediate kind of link here between culture and these initiatives, and that's the manager in the middle.
Yeah.
What does an employee do about that? Because it can all fall down at the manager.
Yeah, it really can. So many times I've seen in organisations where a manager is promoted into that position or hired into that position because there's an assumption that because they were really, really good at their technical job initially, they're automatically going to be an amazing manager. They've never been in that position before. They've never been trained for it. So helping the manager to understand what is required then from a people perspective. It's not about just managing KPIs, managing a team of individuals to do their job. It's about caring and supporting for their team and their staff. So educated managers, making sure they have those people skills, and if they don't, supporting them to have them. But I would say making sure that we're recruiting the managers based on our values as opposed to their competencies, and that they can fit in with the culture that we're trying to get in our business, because that's when we know we've got the right culture fit from a manager as opposed to them just being technically brilliant at their job.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Okay, so Cheryl, you run a very successful award-winning wellbeing business, and I know that you've had a part to play in Steve's story. So firstly, before we go into sort of how you've supported Steve, have you seen like an increasing demand on the need for initiatives around stress at work? What do you see coming across your desk?
I think we see people who are at all levels of the business, from MDs right down to juniors just starting in their careers. And what I've seen probably over the last 2-3 years since starting the business is more and more people who are having either TAs or are experiencing high levels of stress, and even to the point, obviously Steve's a good friend who I've met through work, and it's been an absolute honour to be able to support him. But obviously this is, you don't want to get to Steve's position, do you?
No.
And there's new research out that actually shows there's been a 67% increase in the number of young adults. Young, I'm pleased to say, is less than 55, so I'm very young.
So am I.
Yeah, exactly.
Just.
But 67% increase in young adults who are experiencing a stroke incident. And there's also a link in terms of managerial roles or skilled occupation, which suggests that it's work-related stress, less activity, working long hours, and that is something that I see, within the work that we're doing as well. So it's massively important that we become more aware of how we're feeling so that we can do something about it.
Yeah, a shocking statistic, that really is. So obviously, you've helped sort of Steve with his current condition. So I think the after effects of his stroke is more of a neurological challenge now, I believe. How do your methods help people with such conditions like Steve sort of improve and develop and hopefully get better?
It's interesting because you say it's neurological, which it is, but it's also physical. So the spasticity that Steve's experiencing in his arm, speech, these are physical things. And the techniques that I'm using with Steve are the same ones that we deliver as part of the YOLO experience. And that is to be very conscious when we deliver the massage. So people are actually actively involved. We always start a treatment with the head massage. So when I rock up to Steve's on a Saturday morning, we'll start and we kind of go through the grounding of becoming aware, being aware of our breathing, and the stimulation, the techniques that we use with the head massage are, they actually stimulate biochemicals, so that oxytocin is stimulated, which helps inhibit the release of cortisol and just allows the body to start relaxing and recovering. And then the manipulation, the physical side of what we do, we always do a consultation first, so Steve knows exactly what work I'm going to be doing. We work at a pressure level. So I found that with massage, sometimes people say, do you want it hard, medium or soft? Well, everyone's got a different pressure scale, and quite stereotypically you might feel that a sports massage is inherently going to hurt, but you'll feel the benefits. And if you go for a wellbeing massage, quite often it'll feel nice at the time, but you don't feel much afterwards. And it's finding that balance, whereas if you work with a client and they can feel the depth of pressure, but they're not in any pain, you're not going to get to the point where the muscles are tensing as you're working on them. So you're working with the client. And we do that. We also introduce some visualization as well. So we do the guided breathing, and Steve will actually be visualizing his fingers softening, lengthening, moving back into a more natural position. And as we're doing that, Steve's actually taking control of his own relaxation. You're actually visualizing the muscles moving, and some of the mobilization that we've achieved in probably a relatively short space of time has been quite good, hasn't it?
Steve, how do you think Cheryl's sort of support has been for you?
It's superb.
What would you recommend to anyone who's sort of feeling a bit overwhelmed or stressed? What would your sort of suggestions be to try and help them?
I think the first thing is if you're recognising that you're stressed and overwhelmed, that is the number one biggest thing you can do, because if you're not aware of it, you're not going to do anything about it. So for me, that is, you've made a big step forward if you're acknowledging that you're stressed or you're overwhelmed. And then there's two things. One is distraction and the other one is distance. And that will be different for everyone. So when I say distraction, that's doing something that occupies your brain in something usually that you enjoy, that stops you thinking, stops your brain being busy about all the things that are worrying you, or other catastrophizing things, or making things bigger than what they actually are. So for some people it might be cooking, it might just be colouring or spending time with the kids where you're present with them. For others it might be playing football or jumping out of a plane. It can be anything, but distraction, it changes the way that your body is. It starts inhibiting that cortisol, your body starts recovering naturally on its own. The other one is distance, and that is, you might be in a stressful situation that you need to kind of move away from, but it can also just be talking to somebody, or it could be writing it down. If you get that stress out of your head, it helps you get perspective, it helps you look at things, you can change your mindset. But when it's all up there, and it can become overwhelming. So I think as much as anything, distractions, distance, however that looks for you, are the two things that will help the most.
Quite interesting actually, when you think about those two words. That's probably something you never, Steve, had.
No.
You didn't have any distraction because the business was your life to a certain extent,
Yeah.
and you never really had the time for distractions or putting distance between yourself and work, because it was coming into your home and stuff like that. So it's full on, really.
Yeah.
Cheryl, also, we heard Jenny talk about some initiatives that employers could adopt in the workplace to help people with stress. Do you have any other views or suggestions?
Yeah, well, I think Jenny covered a lot of them, if not all. I think if employees feel supported, they've got that autonomy, they feel like they're in control of the work that they're doing and they're well supported, they'll be resilient to most things. But there's one thing that I find that really rewarding in the work we do with YOLO, and that's when you kind of make people aware of things. So they might come in the van and not realise that they're stressed, and you can actually identify this. You can physically feel the stress, or as you're talking to them, you can see the shoulders just relaxing and consciously letting go of it. Or it might be something as physical as localised tension. You've got some tension down the side of your neck, and it's just like, how are you sitting? Are you working twisted? Do you have dogs that are pulling you? And it's identifying what those, what is causing that then they can go away and make small changes that can actually have quite a big impact and be more motivated to do that as well. The amount of people that come in and then go, oh, actually, I'm going to book a massage, or oh, actually, I'm just going to go and change, how I'm sitting at work.
Yeah.
That's the employer investing in the health of their staff, that then they feel motivated enough to actually go and do something about it. It's a win-win for everybody.
Agreed. Thanks, Cheryl. And also, what are the signs for individuals? What signs do the individuals need to be looking at that, to recognise that they actually are stressed?
Again, there's a very, very long list, probably even longer than the one Jenny came
No,
up with.
right,
So,
we've not got time for that.
exactly. So we did write, we've written a few blogs on that, which you can find on our website, yourwellbeing.co.uk. But I think as an individual, if you notice that you're not yourself, if you notice that you're a bit short-tempered, you don't feel happy, nothing's giving you joy, you feel on edge, when you become aware of it, or even just take a minute and think about it yourself, what are the things that are causing that? What can you do? What can you change to make a difference? I think as an employer, you know your staff. And if you see your staff, if you see a member of staff and their behaviour changes, whether that's over a short period or a longer period of time, then that's when you need to have that conversation. And I think with conversations, we've also found that being direct, but with kindness, not giving people an easy way out, not just saying, "Are you okay?" It's too easy to say no. I've noticed that your behaviour is changing. You may be a little bit quiet in the meeting. Is there something that's bothering you? And having that conversation is can get much better results at the end of it, rather than just that
Human
just
conversations.
Yeah. We're all human.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
Not to say these superhuman.
Super Steve.
Comes back to that point though about Jenny said around sort of training managers to spot the signs as well, so that because sometimes people won't step forward and ask for help, and the manager needs to maybe be the one spots it and steps in. And
Know your staff.
Yes,
Well, I think it works both ways as well. That managers get stressed
absolutely,
out, and their behaviours change, and sometimes it's more difficult for them because as staff, are staff empowered to come and say, look, you don't see yourself at the moment. Is there anything we can help you with?
She's laughing because I think she's approached me a few times and said I'm getting a bit stressed. So
It's a really good point, Cheryl, because as managers who look after a team and have got a lot of responsibility on shoulders, the expectation is just to keep the ship sailing. Some of you will have felt that.
Yeah.
Just keep going for your family, for your business, and we've just got to be like swans all the time. Swimming along gracefully, but underneath we're just paddling like mad.
Yes.
So enabling our staff to be able to come and talk to us and just say, "Are you okay?" as well. It's the best feeling ever if they do that, because it's a real partnership and it's the right culture.
Yeah.
sure, I'm sat at my desk, beginning to feel like I'm stressed out, and I'm sure there's lots of other employees, across organisations might feel the same. What quick methods could they adopt to try and sort of just de-stress? I mean, you talked before about distance and distraction, but what can they actually do in relation to that?
The one that we use quite regularly in the van with people, there's a couple, but one is to get your shoulders back into a neutral position. But the one that we send probably more is if you sit just at the back of your chair, you can all do it if you want to. So if you just feet flat to the floor, you just sit up straight, take a nice deep breath in. You can close your eyes if you want to, which might not be for TV. And then just take a breath in so that you've almost got like someone with a piece of string just pulling your head up. Taking that breath, you get to the top of the breath, pause for a second, and then just gently blow that breath out until there's no air left in your lungs. Almost visualise your lungs deflating in on themselves. When you get to the bottom of that breath, just take another deep breath in. And what you'll find is you can take in so much more breath because you've got rid of all that stagnant air in the bottom of your lungs that we don't use. And again, you're just pulling that string up, so it's just lengthening the neck, bringing your chin in slightly, and just dropping your shoulders. And this time, as you let go of that breath, just feel your whole body sinking down into the chair. Just notice how you sat in the chair, notice your feet on the ground. And just do that 2 or 3 times. you're doing is you're just taking all those busy thoughts in your head that are all external, and we're just forgetting about those. We're just distracting ourselves and looking internally, and we're just checking in with ourselves. And then when you're ready, you just softly open your eyes and bring your attention back to the room.
Vicky's pleased because she's next up and we'll be answering some questions we should now de-stress. This is my colleague Victoria Cross, who is in our Wills and Estate Planning team, a senior associate solicitor there, and she helps a client sort of prepare for the worst, I suppose. And we know from Steve's story that obviously strokes can, if they're not fatal, they can still cause serious disablement and have life-changing impacts on not only his life but on the lives of his family. So I suppose my question to you, Vicky, is, so what steps should an individual be thinking of in terms of protecting their family and their assets?
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious step is a will. So that covers your assets and looks after your family if you die. But what a lot of people don't think about is what might happen, like in Steve's case, where you don't die, but you then end up impaired or disabled in some way, or you lose capacity, mental capacity, and what happens to your assets in your family then. And the way to protect assets there is via a lasting power of attorney. So there are two types of lasting power of attorney. There is one for property and financial affairs, and there's also one for health and welfare. So they cover quite different areas. The property and financial affairs one covers your bank accounts, your property, your savings, investments, your business potentially. And then the health and welfare one is for health and welfare decisions, such as how you're cared for, where you're cared for, what medical treatment you might receive. And it can also cover end-of-life care and life-sustaining treatment as well.
Okay. And I sort of know that Steve mentioned before that he didn't have a lasting power of attorney. He was fortunate enough to be able to arrange one with the support of your wife, through yourself, Vicky. But what's the consequence of not having a lasting power of attorney in place, but not having the capacity to put one in place?
Yeah, I mean, Steve was fortunate, if we can say that, in that mentally you've always been really well. And I met with Steve and assessed you, didn't I?
Mm.
And at that point, actually, your language wasn't nearly as good as it is now.
No.
But despite that, I could tell that you had full capacity to complete a power of attorney, which is essential. Sadly, some people lose capacity either through dementia, a progressive disease, or suddenly through a stroke or a car accident or something like that. And if that happens and they don't have a power of attorney in place, there are a couple of consequences. Firstly, all of their assets are essentially frozen. So, for instance, Steve's bank account, if he had lost capacity or couldn't sign, for argument's sake, then his family wouldn't have been able to access money that was in his sole name. And the difficulty is that when that happens to somebody, they immediately need some sort of care or treatment, and that needs paying for. And if the family don't have other resources, other means to pay for that care, then they need to access that person's finances, and they simply can't do that. Also, if there's any ongoing transactions, such as the sale of a property or the sale of a business, that could all come to a halt while it's dealt with. Now, if you don't have a power of attorney and you lose capacity, there is another mechanism, as there must be, and it's applying to the Court of Protection for a court order, appointing a deputy to deal with your affairs on your behalf. A couple of issues with that is that firstly, it takes at least 18 months, more like 2 years, to get a court order, and in the meantime, everything's sort of in limbo. The other issue is you don't necessarily choose who becomes your deputy, they apply for you, and also the cost, it's a lot more expensive to go down that route, whereas with a power of attorney you can choose who your attorneys are, and as Steve did, you can choose a number of attorneys, so you don't just have one person as you would with a court order. You could choose your wife and your children, for instance. You've got support, you've got backup, it's a much more flexible document and a much more quick to put into place as well.
Yeah, so I suppose the key advice there is that although you might be young as Steve was when you had a stroke at 50 or even younger, put a lasting power of attorney in just as a backup, because you never know what might happen and at least it's there in place to make sure life can continue, even if you don't have the capacity to make those decisions. Your family can pick that up if the powers of attorney.
Exactly that. It's already there. It's up and running if it's needed. The way I speak to a lot of clients about it is it's a bit like an insurance policy. We like to think hopefully it might never be needed, but if you do, it's there and it's up and running. I've got one and I'm only 35, so I do say to people, don't, now is the time to do it. If you've got capacity, do it. Don't risk leaving it until it's too late. A bit like the statistic that Cheryl mentioned, 67% increase in young adults suffering with strokes. That's really a message for people to take away.
And how easy is it to put in place a will or a lasting power of attorney?
I mean, I like to think it's quite straightforward. I'm looking at Steve as he did it.
I just paid you to it.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, I like to think it's really straightforward. So, I mean, a will, to be fair, is legally valid as long as it's dated correctly and signed and witnessed correctly. But we would say seek professional advice to make sure it's properly drawn up and it covers every eventuality. We would have one meeting with you where we take your instructions and discuss your family circumstances and your assets. I'd go away and prepare draft documents and I'd meet you once again to sign. So it is a really straightforward process, and we try to make it as straightforward as possible. I do come across families sometimes, especially blended families, where they haven't necessarily wanted to sit down and discuss a will because they're just not sure how they're going to deal with maybe providing for a second spouse and children from previous. But we do have mechanisms to be able to deal with that scenario, and I'm an advisor at the end of the day, so I do say to people, just come and have a chat. And we will try and make it as straightforward as possible. Luckily, quite a few people do say it was easier than I was expecting it to be. So that's always quite nice.
Thank you very much, Vicky. We've heard Steve's story and the impact that it's had on his life and his family's life, and how important it is to take steps to try and hopefully avoid having a stroke at all. But he did mention during our discussion the valuable work that the Stroke Association can provide to victims of stroke, but also to research to try to prevent stroke. I'm doing a swim in the very cold lake of Lake Windermere, a 10k swim, which is the marathon of swimming, to raise funds for Actors Foundation, and 50% of the funds raised will be going to the Stroke Association. I just wanted to speak to Steve's daughter, Eleanor, just to see why she thinks that such a cause is a worthy cause.
Yeah, the support that the Stroke Association has provided for my dad, as well as the benefits he's got from the NHS with the physiotherapy and the speech therapy. The Stroke Association has been there for all of us to offer support, and all of us have been offered counselling through it, because it's not just dad that's been affected by the stroke, it's all of us. So they've offered some counselling for all of us, endless amounts of support, whatever you've needed, they've been there. You've been, from pretty much once you got back into England, you were offered courses and things like that to help him deal with the aftermath of the stroke. You're currently doing some communication sessions with people in this area who have also had strokes and things that have caused aphasia, just to get them being able to communicate back with each other. The work they are doing is so valuable and it is so vital for the support after the stroke. Obviously, the Stroke Association is also looking at methods to prevent strokes in the long run and doing a lot of research around that, finding better medications to combat strokes so that hopefully people can bounce back quicker. But for us, where we are right now, it has been the post-stroke support that has been absolutely crucial to your growth and progression.
Thank you, Ellie. And I think it's fair to say, we heard from Cheryl before about statistics about the number of people suffering strokes, particularly at a young age, has been having increased significantly. The reality is that the Stroke Association is a charity. It hasn't got limitless funds, and it needs people to continue to raise funds in order to provide that support moving forward. So please, if you can do, please support my sponsored swim so that money can go to the Stroke Association. Thank you.